began to develop a speech impediment called stammering. And every other word, like that, I couldn't get it out. And so, in order to overcome that, I went to see a doctor who taught me a way to control breath. In other words, I was learning an ancient Indian tradition of breath control. I didn't know that's what it was then, but it helped me. And I also learned something else. I decided that because of my interest in magic, that I would practice doing magical tricks in front of a mirror. And to do a trick, it's not just like that. It's what you say that introduces and covers and makes the trick interesting and understandable. So I developed what's called patter, a way of speaking. So that got me into overcoming the stammering. I am still a stammerer. It's like Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm still a stammerer. And I didn't know that until I would spend some time in France. I was visiting professor at the University of Paris, and the professor that invited me said, I want you to speak French. I said, je ne sais pas. I don't know. How can I do that? So I went to Alliance Française, which is a school, every morning from 8 to 12 before I went to my classes. And in the class, the teacher only spoke French, and I had to listen and try to figure out. And I noticed something happened. When I tried to speak French, I stammered. It was still there. I mean, English, I don't stammer, except maybe very rarely. But this was like an astonishing revelation to me. I'm still a stammerer. You may not know it. You think he's a public speaker. But no, underneath that, that's just my projection, my way of dealing with the world. So that, believe it or not, got me into physics because I wanted to know what was going on there. I want to understand that. I want to understand me. And so I began to look at subjects that went into things. Psychology, well, that was okay. But physics got into the deep underlying reality of what everything is. And therein lies the answer. I've got to study that. So I began studying physics in high school. Now, I had a high school teacher who taught physics. You're not going to believe this. His name was Doe. Can you imagine learning physics by Doe? I mean, it was astonishing. And I found out that what I really was interested in the physics class was girls. I had no interest in what he was doing in the class. But nevertheless, my interest was still there. And when I graduated high school, I decided to take engineering physics. I wanted to understand more about how things work. And I went out and got a Ph.D. So it's been a gradual climb into asking a simple question. Why is there anything rather than nothing? And it's still a question which I keep asking.
It's very interesting. How has physics informed your spirituality or your faith tradition, if you have one?
That is another interesting aspect, because for some reason I've been given gifts, and they're remarkable gifts. Where they come from, I don't know. The first time I recognized this gift was when I was a visiting professor at the University of London. And while I was there, I was studying with a guy whose name you may recognize, David Bohm, B-O-H-M, you may. And Bohm was very interested in metaphysical questions, not just physics. And so he would come into my room, which is a very interesting thing. Here's a professor coming to me, I'm just a lowly visiting professor, and ask me all these very basic questions, or tell me his theories. And I didn't quite understand them at all. But nevertheless, I listened. Well, one night, after I was thinking about some physics stuff, I went to bed, and at that time I had a partner. Her name was Nancy, and she and I were living together. And while I was in bed, I went to sleep, and I woke up, and I found myself in a It was as real as this. I was in a room, and it was like a side room, and I was in this room, and I began wondering, what is going on here? And I suddenly noticed that I was able to float, and so I began to float up, and I went up, and then suddenly a door opened into the side room, and a person was standing there. He says, "Come on down." Just like that. Come on down. Like it was everyday occurrence that somebody would be floating up and he would be asking somebody to come on down. So I followed him out into what seemed to be a great green lawn pasture. Very cut grass, very beautiful, sun shining, trees, and there was a circle with wooden, with seemed like brick seating pads. And there were a bunch of people all sitting in this circle. And he asked me to come in and sit with them. And I was just about to do that when suddenly I began wondering, wait a minute, who are these people? What is going on here? I mean, this was as real to me as this is. And then I suddenly began to realize I've just visited where some people go when they die. I had been into a death realm, and I didn't recognize it at first, but then I did. And so then I said, wait a minute, what is going on here? Who are you people? And then suddenly a woman from the other side stood up, started to come towards me, and she said, "You recognize where you are?" And I said, "I think so." And she said, as she came toward, her eyes began to spin, and it frightened me so much that I woke up. But when I say I woke up, I didn't wake up like, ooh. Whoa! Like that is how I woke up. I was jumping out of the bed practically, and I remembered every single thing that happened to me in that so-called dream. That was my first visit. I've had a number of those kinds of visits, and they tell me that what's really happening here is not what it seems to be. That in spite of how real this all seems, it's not the major reality. That comes upon our death. Death is the opening to a new vista. That's what I began to see. So right now, I'm 90. Who knows how long I'm going to go? But it doesn't matter. Because when I go, I have another realm waiting for me. And so do you. All of us do. And that was another thing that came true to me. I realized that in spite of the fact that we all have individual differences about who we think we are, we're not. We're all one. There's only one consciousness that's in this room. And in fact, on this planet. It's only one, and we are that one. I know there are people who are part of the one who seem like complete dolts, and we wish they weren't here, but that's part of consciousness too. Having dolts as well as wise is all part of the picture. You've got to have both in order to keep some kind of sane balance. So anyway, these are just some things that have occurred to me which made me realize that physics is not just the answer, it leads into a realm of spirituality, which we're all part of.
How do we connect quantum physics to this idea of the death realm and spirituality?
Well, that's another thing which came into being. Let me talk about physics for a moment, and I'll go into quantum physics. Classical physics is very much what you got is what you see. What you see is what you got. Chair, leg, arm, whatever. You see these things as objects, things which exist out there. And the object of classical physics was to understand if there are, the laws which govern how these objects behave. That's so-called Newtonian mechanical thinking. Newton was great, By the way, he was a Kabbalist. I don't even think Ebony even knew that. But he was more interested in spirituality than he was physics. Physics was like a pastime to him. He did that while he was at Woolsthorpe in his farm on Woolsthorpe in England while they were going through the Black Plague. He was thinking of things like physics. But he was mainly a Kabbalist. Anyway, the classical realm of trying to make a mathematical model of where things are and how they behave and how they move is called classical physics. And there's a one-to-one correspondence. I write an equation, F equal ma, force equals mass times acceleration, and from that I can derive where an object is, where it's going to go, and how it's going to behave, according to what forces are acting on it. That's classical physics. Quantum physics said, let's try that thinking. Let's see if that works for the smallest objects we can possibly observe, called atoms. And even light itself. Can we observe light? How does it? What is light? How does that work? So when the first thinking in the turn of the 20th century began, people began to realize that the model that everything was made of objects that move according to Newtonian laws was wrong. They were getting results that did not agree with that. It's called the infrared catastrophe, or ultraviolet catastrophe, that occurred when people were studying the light being emitted by hot ovens. They expected a certain light spectrum, that is, a frequency of the light as a result of its amplitude, how hot it was, and they weren't getting the result they expected from Newtonian physics. So this physicist, Max Planck, suddenly comes up with an idea. He says, suppose the energy is not continuous. You want to know where the word quantum comes from, right? Quantum means a whole amount of something, right? So why quantum physics? He says, suppose the energy coming off from this oven of hotness is not made of continuous light, but is bundles, little that kind of stuff coming off. And they said, what the hell's going on there? And so when he figured that out, and he used that as part of the mathematics of what's going on, what came out of that was quantum physics. And that led into a revolution of thinking, where now we know that things are not things. Things are possibilities of things, which only come into reality as what we think are things when they're observed. Non-observed things don't even exist as things. They only exist as clouds of possibilities. And suddenly an observation takes place. You can ask what that observation is. That's another question. But when had an observation occur, suddenly thingness comes into being. And suddenly what was ultimately possible with a reality there, or reality there. Every one of those is an observation. And when those observations occur, we construct reality. And if we do that a certain way, it looks like normal, ordinary, good old-fashioned chair reality. But if we do it in a more careful way, which quantum physics allows us to now do, we don't see this as a chair. We see this as particles of chairness, which luckily are still supporting me. And there is a probability, it's very small, that this chair can suddenly go and my ass would be on the ground. So I'm very thankful that the probabilities are very solidly good that the chair will exist as a chair. And so are you. And so are we all. We have bodies because we're thankful that they exist. But they don't quite exist as we think they do. They age. What is aging? What does that mean to get old? What is happening? The answer is letting go. Aging is not a process of deterioration. It's a process of letting go. As a kid, you want to hang on to everything. But as you age, you begin to realize that there's some things you just let go of. And if you keep hanging on to them, you become kind of moronic. We have maybe a couple of people that are in positions of power that are still acting moronically, thinking they're still kids, and actually they're just overgrown morons. That's the kind of country we seem to live in. Anyway, that's besides the point. Have I answered your question?
I think so. Like how do we think about spirituality in terms of quantum physics, and how does that inform?
Well, the underlying understanding that we have of the way of dealing with quantum physics is we deal with something that we imagine is present called a quantum wave function. And it doesn't have any material. It's wavy. Wavy in what? In nothing. It's waves of nothingness. And these waves of nothingness are what I think of as the presence of the spiritual underlying reality, which is part of our existence. Without the waves of nothingness, things that we normally do, like think, react, see, all the things that we do, these things wouldn't occur. So I think that that is what spirituality is. If I were to make a picture of spirituality, as these waves which fill the universe, fill everything, and we ourselves are encapsulating those waves of nothing. So that's what I see as the underlying reality of quantum physics and the spiritual basis for it. I don't know if I can explain it any better than that.
Do you believe in sort of a higher power that has created these waves, or that they just sort of appeared?
That's an interesting term, higher. Higher. Higher than what? What's higher? That is what we are. We are that higher power. There's nothing, we are that. In a certain sense, whatever you have in mind as to a picture of God is really a reflection of yourself. God is you. You are God. I know that sounds almost sacrilegious, but that's not what it's meant by it. It's simply a recognition that you are a holy being. Holy means whole, together. And that the God presence is in you. That's how I understand it. And that's what I think everything that I've learned has taught me.
So thinking about sort of the new research and new physics that's happening now, are there some things that you've been looking at that you're interested in that have been something that you've been thinking about?
What I'm thinking about now? Well, this may sound even stranger, but what I'm thinking about now is consciousness itself and what it means to be conscious. And there's one thing that I recognize that we all hold, that we all have. Every single one of us has self-consciousness. We all recognize that we have a self-consciousness. We can prove it by looking in a mirror. We can listen to our own voice if we like to, or we relate to another human being, and then another human being says, "You're a blah blah blah," or "Not a blah blah blah," and we become aware of our being as self-awareness. Quantum physics doesn't seem to indicate how that arises. How does self-awareness arise? And I began to wonder, what is there about self that is different from not-self? How does it arise? What is it? And then I began to look at the world and realize that what we do as self is objectify everything that's not self. Whatever is out there, we call out there. And the question is there an out there? But we believe or think or tend to act as if there is something called an out there and a self. So we make a distinction between out there and self. Could I prove that, show that in some quantum mechanical way? Is there some way to do that? And I began exploring something which may seem strange to a spiritual audience. Quantum automata. These are little tiny machines that are able to operate according to the laws of quantum physics. In fact, you've probably heard the term quantum computers. That's become a big byword today. And they're different from classical computers because they're able to hold in their memories something that's called a superposition. Now, I don't want to confuse you, but a superposition is like you have somebody puts a question before you, and the answer is yes, no, yes or no, no. In quantum physics, yes and no. Both answers are simultaneously present until you come along and observe and say, no, yeah. And if you don't do that, it's still yes and no. So there is something in a quantum memory, quantum computer chip, which holds the yes and no together as one answer. I thought, that's interesting. What if I build a device that will somehow go into that machine and look at the yes answer and at the no answer and somehow get the answer yes on one part of the machine sees yes and the other part of the machine sees no. Can I build a machine to do that? That's because, yeah, quantum physicists, that's what quantum computation is. So I pictured a device that is on one place is looking at the yes answer, and the other place is looking at the no answer, and it has those still piled together. It hasn't answered the question yet. It just kept the puzzle together as one. And I said, what is that thing called that keeps these two things together as one? And I realized it's a state of consciousness. It's a state of consciousness. We may call it ambiguity, but it nevertheless is a state that we can write down as a quantum physical state. I said, okay, what if I take this machine that looked into and answered yes and no, and decided to look at the togetherness of both and added them together and looked at that and put that in its memory, put that in its pipe and smoke it. So here it is. It's got in its memory the state in which it knows in one place yes and another place no, and it knows both yes and no at the same time. What kind of state is that? And then I realized that in that state it has a self-reference built in. Because as that state, in one world it sees yes, in another world it sees no. It has both of those, so it's able to look at the sum of those two things as something different from either or. It sees both and from that point, we have a beginning of self-reference coming in. Because in that world, it can know things that, according to quantum mechanics, it shouldn't be able to know. It has a reference in which it knows both and, yes and no, and it's self-knowing it knows both and, yes and no. So it's in a state of knowing two things at the same time that are contradictory. According to quantum physics, according to common sense, it shouldn't be able to do that. But it's possible. And if that's possible, we have a beginning of a new field of physics, which I would call self-referencing quantum automata. And that means if we can build a machine that does that, now this is sound really weird. How is that different from you or I? How is that machine different from any one of us? Can that machine be different? And the answer is, I don't see how. In other words, is it possible that we've enabled by this scheme a way that consciousness itself, what we call consciousness, which contains both yes and no, can infiltrate a mechanical device? And I said, what is different about that than the way consciousness infiltrates a human being? I don't see any difference. Now that sounds really weird. So that means that machines can be spiritual too. Now think about that. You may think, well, who believes that? None other than the Dalai Lama himself. He was the first to bring this up. When asked about it, he said, sure, why not? He didn't see anything special about humanness. What he saw special was mind consciousness. He saw that as very special and couldn't see any reason why anything could be made conscious. And I thought, well, proof is in the pudding. Let's see if I can make such a model. That's what I'm working on. Weird, isn't it? These are just the weird things. I must admit it's weird.
Have you been able to find people to talk about these things with now? Is it different now to talk about these sort of more theoretical ideas than it was 50, 60 years ago?
You know, the truth is I've been a loner in all the science I do. It's rare that I have time or anybody to communicate with. When I was working in labs, I would have people to talk to. But then I was doing pretty much straightforward kind of physics calculations and needed the help of people in the lab, and there was no problem. But as I got older, I began more or less becoming a loner. And that in a way is stupid. I should really communicate ideas to other people who have the ability to understand them. But I guess maybe I'm just getting old.
Did you have some interesting conversations with people about these sort of things in the past? You had some...
Well, the things I talked about in the past were more or less straight kinds of quantum physical calculations. Remember, I told you that I began working on a field that was of interest to the military, called after a nuclear burst in the atmosphere changes. How does it change? Well, it produces ions, that is, electrically charged molecules and atoms. And because ions react differently with molecules that are not ions, we have what are called ion molecule reactions. And when they occur, they completely change the way the upper atmosphere behaves. And the reason the military wants to know what happens after a nuclear burst is, can we send signals that will get through the ion, bounce off the ionosphere, but with the mix-up of all the chemistry going on in the upper atmosphere, they were afraid that this would cut off communication. And the military does not like to be in a state where its communication is cut off. It wants to know what's going on all the time. So I was able to get a lot of grant as a professor at the university to study ion molecule reactions. And they basically supported me. Even years later, when I wasn't even doing that anymore, they were still sending me money. So I hit a nerve, or what we call a vein. And I was a visiting professor in Paris, and in London, and Germany, and Israel. And all that time, I was still getting funded by the Air Force. So, in a way, I was very lucky. But the luck was that I was doing this more or less straightforward physics, not the spiritual kind we're talking about here.
Quantum physics. So why should people care about quantum physics? How does it interact with people's daily life?
Well, first of all, whether you care or don't care, you care. You're in a state of, you could say, I'm either I don't care or I care, both and, but actually you're going to be choosing to care, and even if you choose not to care, that will open up into, why don't you care? So there's going to be, you're ultimately going to be caring about quantum physics. It already has influenced your life. Let me show you a quantum physical device. How many of you have one of these in your pocket right now? Most of the people in the audience, right? Well, this one word never wasn't for quantum physics. This is basically a quantum mechanical device. The way the little chips inside work is pure quantum mechanics. So you're already using quantum mechanics. In fact, how many of you have heard the term artificial intelligence? These things have artificial intelligence built in. You ask certain questions, and somehow it brings up an answer. And then where does that come from? Is there some being up there answering this question? No, it's not. It's a huge memory system having billions and billions of bits of data. And when you ask a question, certain key words are picked out, and it takes that word and branches into all these different possible ways in which that word is being used, and then it brings back answers. And if the answer looks like it fits into other words in your question, it uses it. If the answer doesn't fit into the question you're using, it discards it. So eventually, from all the billions of answers that come back from that one word, only one or two work, and finally it settles on one and gives you an answer. Am I beautiful? Oh, yes, you are. You're the most beautiful thing in the world.
So do you think AI could come into play with the little quantum devices, the self-referential
You think you can what?
Do you think AI is a part of the thought experiment you're doing about the quantum automata?
I'm not sure I understand. You think AI is...
Do you think that artificial intelligence could come into play when you're experimenting with those self-referential quantum automata?
Yes, it can. In fact, one of my friends, a physicist, is actually using AI to write his papers. I think that's ridiculous, but he thinks that's the way to go. Apparently, whatever has been thought is out there somewhere, and somehow he puts it together as his thought. And that's pretty egoic, but that's the way some people are. So yes, it can be, it's being done, and it may lead to stupidity, but it could also lead to some new answers.
Okay, well, I'm wondering if there are questions from people in the audience. You right there.
So I'm starting to understand. I've read that quantum physics has the ability to crack encryption, and that it could be a threat to national security. How exactly could quantum physics in itself crack encryption?
I'm missing a word. Crack, did you say?
Well, be able to work around encryption, making encryption non-effective, for lack of better words.
I'm not sure I'm understanding.
I think that he's asking, how is the new quantum encryption maybe different from classical encryption, and how could that be a threat to national security? Could that be a threat to...
If you don't mind, let me restate my question.
Are you asking about encryption?
Yes, so we all know what encryption is, I hope. It's a way of being able to protect identities or protect, say, credit cards and things of that matter. So that's what I mean by...
Okay. I think I'm beginning to see the gist of your question.
Yeah, sorry that I wasn't clear enough. So the question is, because I'm fascinated by quantum physics, it's now you even have computer companies that are called quantum, and they're in the stock market and things of that nature. So quantum physics and quantum it has become ubiquitous, and you held up an iPhone, so that's a quantum device. But my specific question is, I'm curious about how quantum physics is being used to be able to understand and be able to crack or be able to make encryption ineffective.
Okay, I got the question. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So the question basically is, can we use quantum physics to decrypt?
Yes, that's it.
Can we find if we have an encrypted amount of information,
Right.
can we use quantum physics to find a way to decrypt it?
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure the answer is yes or no yet. As far as I know, quantum physics is not, I mean, most encryption schemes require a large number of bits. Something like the RSA scheme, which is a name used, has something like 128 bits, maybe 256 bits. Well, that's a string of zeros and ones, which is 256 bits long, with zeros and ones distributed through it all. You can picture that, like, can that particular distribution of zeros and ones be decoded in some way? How would it do that? Well, it would have to go through every possible, according to classical thinking anyway, it would have to go through every possible array of those zeros and ones. So the first term in that array would be all zeros. Next would be all zeros and a one. Next would be all zeros and 1 0, and so forth. Until you have every single possible distribution of zeros and ones. And that's 2 to the 256 power, which is bigger than anything else in the universe. There's nothing that big. That's a big number. Could a quantum computer actually do that? I don't know. I don't think so. I think right now we don't have the technology to do that. So could it be that we would develop a technology that could do that? Maybe. But what you're asking is, you want to ask the question of the quantum computer, give me all the possible arrays of zeros and ones in a 256-bit array of bits. Give me them all. It would take as much time as there is left in the universe to do all that. It couldn't give them all. There's just too many. So it seems to me that if that's the way it works, the answer is no. It never will decrypt, because it can't find a single answer, which will be the answer it's looking for, that will allow the code to be unlocked. So as far as I say, no.
Yeah, I have 2 questions, and I'm wondering if you could speak to them, because I'm very interested in it. One, there's a lot of talk that we're in a simulation.
Could you speak up, please?
One is that people say that we're in a simulation, that we can speak to that. And then 2, should we just start there and then come up with the second one later? A simulation that we are.
Okay, let's narrow it down to one question first, and then we'll answer. What's the first question?
Could you speak to the idea that many people believe that we're in a simulation?
Oh, okay. The notion that this is not real, it's like a virtual reality, a simulation, that sort of thing.
Correct.
Well, if it isn't a simulation, and this is appearing as what it appears to be, wouldn't that apply to someone's looking at that assimilation? Who's looking? Who's the ultimate observer of that assimilation? Is there such a thing? Well, the answer is yes. You are you're the ultimate observer of that assimilation. So whether it's an assimilation or what you call reality is really dependent on how you want to look at things. But ultimately, it's you. What's the next question?
Okay, so the next question I've kind of been working with is that with AI, do you think that eventually that'll become like our brain, and then which will free up which even though we do not use all of our brain now, but would it free up our brain to not have to learn these things that we have to go through life learning, go to school, education, and that will free it up to allow the brain to open up to different consciousness and the parallel universes.
Could you simplify your question?
If we are using AI to cover, in our brains, to cover more of the more basic.
If we're using AI to cover our brains.
To cover the basic processes
Of
the brain, can we unlock it?
Wait, let's stop right there. Using AI to cover the basic processes of the brain?
It becomes our...
What makes you think AI can do that?
If artificial intelligence can teach us everything, that means we don't have to learn anything anymore, so we don't have to critically think anymore, so that way, can we free up our brain to learn other things?
So you want to learn without learning?
Right. Learn more.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Answer.
There you go. You got it.
Is it possible that somehow some AI device would just give us the information we want
Let's do it
without
now.
us ever trying to find it?
Yeah.
No. Why? Because in order to get an answer, you have to have a question.
Right.
And if you don't have a question, there's no such thing as an answer. So if you never question, if somebody gives you an answer, and for example, I'm going to give you an answer right now. The answer is, what's the question? Well, it's a good answer, but what is the question? You don't know because you don't know what that means. You can't have meaning without a question.
What if AI is teaching you, like they teach your children?
What?
What about if AI becomes the teacher for these basic things, so it will tell the young child, let's say, I haven't thought about this, so forgive me. So the child is going to learn through the AI, but doesn't really have to figure things out.
I said, children and AI, what do you want to do there?
Well, I'm just trying to say that let's forget the children. So if we just have AI, that becomes like a separate brain we can always tap into to learn.
You want to have AI be a separate brain,
I don't want that. I'm just saying.
but you're asking the question.
Right. I want to explore.
Well, it is in a way a separate brain,
It
but it
is.
doesn't work unless you ask questions of it.
Correct. So it's there. So do you think because we'll have all that, we're all tapping into it now, is it going to free up parts of our brains to travel in other universes, consciousness, parallel universes?
Free up your brain to do what?
So we don't have to learn, spend so much time learning, because we can just ask the question and get the answer.
Your brain, in spite of what you may have heard, is working at 100% efficiency right now. It's doing everything it can to deal with what's going on.
Right.
There is no free space there. There is no place, a little pocket of, if I want to get in there, I can really learn things. No, it's not that way.
Yeah, that's like that.
Your brain is working constantly. You know how many billion neurons
It
there
would
are?
be like a secondary drive or something like that. Anyway.
Okay, 2 more questions. Yeah.
Sure. First of all, thank you for your time today and your questions today.
Yes.
It's a very fascinating subject, and for kind of breaking it down in somewhat digestible, very complex subject in a way that makes it a little easier for me to digest. Earlier, you had mentioned specifically having an experience when you went to bed, and it kind of opened your mind to, you talk about going, floating and you calm down and going into the street pasture, and gave you, from what I heard, a sense of something like life or something beyond, let's say. And then you said that you had a few of these experiences without elaborating on them specifically. My question is sort of twofold. A, in each one of those experiences that you had that were similar to that, were they always around going to sleep, and then therefore you quoted maybe being a dream, but it didn't sound like you felt you were a dream. And what would you say to somebody who said that wasn't the experience, it actually was a dream? Does that make sense, the question?
I'm going to ask you to repeat that very slowly.
Sure. You had mentioned
Very simple, make it a simple question.
Sure. You mentioned having an experience where you were floating and called to another area.
Wait. What's the question?
What would you say to somebody who said those experiences that you had were not the experience you described, but more an actual dream?
I'm not sure I understand. Do you understand?
The experiences that you had where you saw a different realm, the silo.
Oh, what are you talking about? My dream?
Yes.
Yes,
So
yes.
what if someone told you, well, that was just a dream. You didn't actually experience that.
They could tell me anything.
Well,
What's your first question?
It was a two-part question. You mentioned having multiple of these experiences. My question then became, did each one of those experiences happen when you laid down and went to sleep?
Can each of us inherit?
Did they happen when you went to sleep? And what would you say to somebody who said, that's simply you were just dreaming?
Someone says that's just a dream?
Yeah.
So you were dreaming. That, whatever you described, which you said necessarily wasn't a dream.
What's the difference between dream and reality?
DREAM.
Yes. Was it a dream? Was it not a dream?
You said it wasn't.
Well,
I'm saying,
let's get into what is this. You want to get into the state of consciousness of dreaming? And what's going on there with REM, our rapid eye movement, and that sort of thing? This is a form of dreaming that's been labeled lucid dreaming. A dream is when you are aware of things happening, but you're not aware of yourself in the dream. In a lucid dream, you are aware of yourself in the dream. You have, while the dream is going on, you have self-awareness. You know you're in a dream. So here I am dreaming, I'm in a dream. What is that? What do you call that state of consciousness? It's not ordinary dreaming. Because ordinary dreaming, I never get that. In lucid dreaming, you do. And many people who I've talked with who practice spiritually the art of lucid dreaming, such as Tibetan Buddhists, think nothing of that. They think that's normal. That's just another state of consciousness to them. They don't think of it as being so much different, so much weird or strange or just something. They just think of it as that's what it is. It's a state of knowing you're aware of what's happening in the dream. There are certain things which happen that I recall during this state. One is I can touch things. And I could feel things. Things had texture. That I remember.
Then what specifically in it made you say, whether you were lucid dreaming or not, you said you now knew from that experience that there was something beyond life. That's what you had said. So what specifically made you think that, regardless if it was a lucid dream or whatever you want to characterize it as?
I'm not sure what's beyond. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
I think you had mentioned it gave you confidence that there was something more to life past.
Was I confident there's a world beyond? Is that what you're
What
asking? Is that what you're asking?
No, what specifically was it that made you say, you said, that it gave you confidence that there was something more beyond life for not just
Well,
you said for everything?
you have to remember that that wasn't the only quote-unquote weird or out-of-body or lucid state that I've ever been in. I've had others. So it's a question of composites. Have you ever floated above your body? I have.
that experience, yes.
Okay, so that gives you a hint that there's something more going on than just what's happening in the neural tissue of your body. In fact, so there's little hints, that we have that there's something else going on. And what that realm is, or what it is your natural home. It's where you live. You've always lived there. You're no different than me. We're one in that realm. And we won't see any differences. Only when we get down to here do we begin to appreciate difference. Almost as if it's a fun game to play. Oh, you're different from me! Wow! But you're not. That's what I garnered from these various experiences that I've had.
We have one more question.
Okay, one more question.
then we have a little reception in the library afterwards, so please join us in the library.
So my question pertains to your comments about radiation and how it was released into the atmosphere and your work with.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I would like to know what your opinion is about the advancements in nuclear energy and safety, because I think we're all aware that nuclear energy has been around for many decades, and it's fallen out of favor. And the reason why I ask is because I had a very mind-blowing conversation with a nuclear engineer who basically said that the 3 nuclear disasters that we all know about, Fukushima, Daiichi, Chernobyl, and 3 Mile Island, were all, like he said, 3 Mile Island was basically a PR thing where the fossil fuel industry made it seem a lot worse, and we weren't actually exposed to that much radiation, just as much as like you would get in a dentist's office or something. Chernobyl was because it was based on Russian technology that wasn't used outside of Russia, and then Fukushima Daiichi, he said, was actually not that. Basically what I'm wondering is because he said, it's, as a nuclear engineer, that it's a way out of climate change and an alternative energy source that's very promising. And I'm just wondering what your opinion is as to, has nuclear energy become much more safe? Using it?
Well, let me answer very simply. Nothing is safe.
Okay, yeah.
Let's be very clear.
Yeah.
Nothing is perfectly safe. Right. And whatever we do, there's risk involved. Even the production of electricity was risky. We now think we have control of electricity, but we don't. The lightning can strike you anytime. Nuclear power, nuclear energy, is just some other form of energy, and we attempt to control it as best we can, but nothing is perfectly safe. This is not a safe world. Get over the idea that it is perfectly safe. It isn't. Anything can happen at any time. So that's another reason why we look to Spirit to guide us through this situation that we always find ourselves in. And as long as we have mad people trying to lead us, as we presently find ourselves in, we become more aware of how dangerous the situation is. So the idea is, go on in spite of it. There's always going to be danger, but live, because this is not the end of the road. We're all going to pass through this realm. Nobody here gets out of here alive. So you're all in danger. You're all going to die. There's no way out of it. So enjoy the time you have, because whatever it is, that's it.
I think
and
one
we
of
have the next world.
I think one of the things that faith and science share is that the more you learn, the more questions you have, right? And so I think we've seen that. Thank you so much to Dr. Fred Allen Wolf and Chloe Faison.